I opted to put this match first to show you how a deck like this can really punish some of the more tempo-oriented and aggro-oriented decks in the format right now. The deck list review and breakdown will be at around the 7-minute mark in this video. But here we're going up against the second place European Championship list that was Emerald Amethyst, and we're using the Ruby Amethyst burn deck. This one focuses less on removal, so there's no Medusas or anything like that in the deck, but it focuses on putting down either the Moana or a Sisu / Fox to combo with the FLYNN Rider on turn 2. So you have a good turn 1 and turn 3 combo piece, air quotes, with FLYNN Rider. Now, when you're in an actual match, obviously combos may not go off exactly as intended, but you'll see kind of how this deck is intended to play out. Starting off, the opponent gets a Tamago and a Diablo on board. We've got a Sisu and a Madam Mim Snake. So our board is already, pretty high up on the strength. Unfortunately, we did not have a FLYNN. On the play, this deck is extremely strong, I will say that. On the draw, you basically can try to claw back advantage since you are playing things like Maui Shark in combination with FLYNN. There's almost nothing in the game that's going to challenge the 7 strength of the Maui Shark, really. I mean, there are a few things, but not very much played, basically. You still focus on some removal options, as you can see here, playing out the Brawl, and holding these friends on the other side in my hand is really risky because obviously into Emerald, we know that they play Ursula Deceiver, and so normally you don't want to be drawing those cards when you can't sing them or play them. You want to get them out of your hand as quickly as possible, but since I have 2, I'm like, yeah, I can probably afford to keep them because if I get one ripped, I can probably play the other one later. And the nice thing about a deck like this, right, you don't really care too much about your actions going to the discard. You saw me discard, I think it was a Be Prepared early on off the Cursed Merfolk, and that's simply because, again, when you get to the Maui Shark line, you can just get anything back. So you see me ink the second Friends because I don't want to play into a Deceiver here, and we're going to be able to start trying to clean up the board a little bit. We are low on lore, but so is the opponent technically. They're going to go to 8 with this Genie, and we don't directly have an out to the second Genie here, which is unfortunate, but they might actually use their Genie to challenge the Elsa here, which is actually good for me because I have a second Elsa in hand. And this is not necessarily a bad play by the CPU, because if you're thinking about like racing the opponent here, I did have the second Elsa anyways, so it didn't really matter too much. I was still going to take out the Genie next turn. They would have just got an extra 2 lore out of it. But if I didn't have the second Elsa, then that would have been the correct play because their Genie would have gone uncontested, or it would force me to waste another Brawl on it. So here we end up cleaning up the board, and it looks really good for us. But again, this is a very swingable match, so to speak, right? It looked like we have the advantage, but the opponent just does some cleanup on their own, and the board state more or less looks equal. The Pirate's Life here is very interesting, and I really do like this card, and I do think more lore drain cards should come out soon, or in future sets, because you just need ways to like not feel helpless in situations, and a card like the Pirate's Life really does that. Here you're going to see us be able to drop the Goofy, which was like the perfect draw here in order to properly trade out against the White Rose while keeping my Goofy on board and gaining lore in the process. Just like that, we've equalized the lore state, we've got card advantage, we've got board state advantage, but the opponent does have a discard and a draw 1 on board in the Rabbit and the Cursed Merfolk, so we do have to be careful of that. They've got their own Elsa, which they're probably going to use to take out my Goofy here, and that's fine. Again, the Elsa, because we're not playing crabs in this list, is a little bit of an issue with the 5 willpower, but we're just going to go ahead and start off by trading out their Rabbit and then trading out their Merfolk. And this is why Emerald Amethyst is so good, because it looked like we were very strong, and then all of a sudden, look at what happened. We just got a couple of cards in hand. The opponent is able to keep their Elsa up because we don't have enough to take it out yet. And basically what we're going to do is just cycle through our Mims and the Elsa here just to keep our board ready. The opponent is ahead on lore back at 10, but we did clean up their board and get rid of a Rabbit and a Cursed Merfolk out of rotation. They play their third Genie, which is just like, holy moly, really hard to deal with here. And I have a couple of options. I think this threw a little too much. You could argue that I could drop the Genie, but then I would give the opponent the free draw and quest off the Chernobog. So instead, I opt to put damage on the Elsa and take out the Chernobog because I'm hoping to draw a Maui Shark. I play 3 in this deck, see it in the deck list portion coming up, and the Maui Shark just instantly checks the entire Emerald Amethyst board, right? As long as they're not like going to close out the game within the next turn, the turn after I play the Maui Shark, I have like all of my good utility spells, my utility actions in the discard. I've got the Pirate's Life, I've got Friends, I've got Be Prepared in there. So I can get back anything I need. It's probably going to be the Pirate Life in order to slow the game down and retake advantage. And this is what a deck like this does. We draw the Moana a little late, but that's okay. We're able to drop double draw spells in the Genie and the Rabbit here. And again, the opponent, threatening to go to 15, but they don't have a double cycle of Goat, like enough ink for it. You need 10 ink or 8. Yeah, no, 10 ink, right? Because Goat, Snake, Goat. So even if they had that, they'd only go to 18 anyways. But they're going to play the Shadow. Again, that was played in the European Championship list. And the Shadow actually takes out a threat. We finally top deck the Maui Shark here. And we're going to go ahead, trade out Genie, leave the Elsa on board, quest with Rabbit, and say if you want to trade out my Rabbit, go ahead. Because now the Maui Shark, if you exert anything, unless you can go for game right away, the Maui Shark is going to clean up quite nicely here. They're going to drop Crab on Fox. Okay, so just putting stuff on board, but it doesn't do anything. You could argue here that the opponent should not have quested and just tried to go wide, but then they run the risk of us be preparing, right? So they're in a very awkward spot. It's like, do you just keep everything ready and hope to just quest in one go for game? Or do you risk that I draw into another Pirate Life or be prepared and clear the board if you don't have any follow-up? Because you can't really go wide. So you can't stay small with and go for game, right? Like you're going to have to develop a board in order to quest for game. And if you develop a board, if I have the Be Prepared in my back pocket, then like I clear your board, you have nothing, no follow-up. So here you can see I just think a little bit and I'm like, yeah, let me just play it safe, play the Pirate's Life. We gain 3 off of that because we got the extra 1 lore off of the Maui Shark. And then I probably shouldn't have played this, but what else was I going to play, right? I go to 19 because I gained 3 off of the Gathering Knowledge. And at this point, yeah, we win the game. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck list and break this down. But yeah, Maui Shark in this burn build, huge fan of it. You're seeing it in action here. Huge fan of Pirate's Life. Obviously, huge fan of Friends. Draw cards. Who doesn't love that? But yeah, that's going to wrap up this game. Let's go ahead and take a look at the deck list. Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I wanted to take a quick look at an interesting concept to come out of the European Championship, and that was a take on Ruby Amethyst that focused more on burn. And one of the ways it did this was by using the Moana on 1 as an overstated 3/2 body to pair with a FLYNN on 2, because most 1/2 drops on the opposing side usually won't be able to put something out that's 3 strength or more. I mean, there are a few cards, like Calhoun on Steel, Bonsai on Emerald, but for the most part, it can be very difficult to contest this Moana for the FLYNN trigger, especially when your opponent is on the draw. And as a result, your FLYNN can trigger very early, multiple times, going for 3, 6, 9 lore potentially. And then when you curve out, we already know how powerful the FLYNN can be when you drop something like a Sisu on 3, or even a Madam Mim Fox to bounce back the Moana. Now you, instead of having a 3/2, you have a 4/3, all the while hopefully triggering the FLYNN, right? If your opponent doesn't have direct removal for the FLYNN. What's also very oppressive is if you end up questing with these threats, your opponent basically has to out them if they don't have removal for the FLYNN, because the Moana will likely trade up, right? That's why things like Bonsai and Calhoun are so good, is because the 3/2 stat line trades out opposing Mim Foxes, trades out a lot of other cards as well. Like this will trade out into a Calhoun, even though if the Calhoun challenges it, they will gain the 2 lore. Or a Bonsai probably doesn't challenge this, but they might, right? Because they might just need to get it off the board. So yeah, it can be very interesting to see how you curve out within the first 3 turns, getting a lot of value out of this FLYNN rider here. And then on the top end, I've opted to go more traditional. Of course, there's a bunch of different ways you can build this, but I've opted for 3 Genie and 3 Rabbit, so the 3/3 split. We only are on 11 uninkable, so you could go 4 Genie if you wanted to, but I did want to make space for the Goofy. I've talked about this card before in set 4, and I really do think that this is a very underrated card, and it will continue to be pretty underrated. Just the fact that you can drop this gain 2 lore right away, while potentially taking out a threat, maybe even boosting it up with things like Crab, which is not in this deck, or even the new Madam Mim that gives Challenger +1, or just Lumiere giving +1 strength to everything. There's and future cards that come out that will just make this better as well. It's very interesting to see how this card will develop, but I do think this is a very strong card. So again, just coming out of nowhere, gaining 2 lore, proccing FLYNN, gaining 3 lore every turn if it's not removed, very, very strong. You have the standard Amethyst Ruby package that is also pretty powerful. And then of course, one of the best synergies with the new Maui Shark is pairing it with Amethyst so that you can use the Elsa to tap down and then force the exertion, right? I know that Shark is being played in red-blue, but one of the things is your opponent can just be like, I'm just not going to exert anything, your Shark won't trigger. Well, with Amethyst, you can play Shark. If your opponent's like, okay, I just passed turn, I don't want to exert anything, and then you're like, Elsa 5th Spirit, tap down what you kept ready, Maui Shark, take it out. These both have evasive as well, so very strong into evasive threats that your opponent might try to protect. And then for your actions and songs, double Pirate's Life. We are seeing this card being played in at more than one now, which is very interesting. So it's very powerful if you do get this off, especially if you can recur it, because clawing back 2 lore can really make the difference between whether you win or lose, honestly. Like, I do think we see more cards in the future that drain lore, because I think Ravensburger probably wants to slow the game down a little bit, which is weird to say, but I do think that's the way they have to go, because basically the games basically get to a state where, like, and you've seen it on stream multiple times, like, there's nothing you can do. Like, okay, like my opponent just went first, they have, you know, tempo, and I just couldn't keep up, and they just close the game out. We need cards to slow that down a little bit, to claw back lore, so that the opponent can't just run away with the game and just continue to quest and ignore your board, basically. But we'll see how that goes. I've only opted for 1 Gathering Knowledge. Again, it's an uninkable, it can be a little clunky, but if you do get this in rotation, you play it, and then you're able to recur it, that's 4 lore, right, or 5 lore, because if you recur it and play it with the Maui, you also gain lore on actions, an ability that I forget about a lot. And then, of course, Brawl, Friends. Only 3 Friends, though, and then 4 Be Prepared, just because you do want to be able to just, like, nuke the board. Because the goal is that, without Medusas and things like that, you just want to have that powerful board reset, since the goal is you get ahead in the lore very, very quickly with the FLYNN. And then if your opponent ends up dealing with your board and getting their game plan going, you just do the reset with the Be Prepared. You should have cards to close the game out with, like Merlin Goat, etc. You have the Rabbits. You are playing 8 of the Mims to bounce the Goat back, so a lot of, you know, traditional gain lore out of nowhere, with the Goofies especially. Follow up with Genie, right? Very powerful threat. So a very interesting deck list. Again, not exactly the same as Lorcana Decklist version. I think he was on like Thieveries and more Gathering Knowledge. He was just a much more aggressive burn, where I've opted for a little bit more of a traditional Ruby Amethyst build while still focusing on like the FLYNN Rider package. We're getting more utility out of that. But yeah, I do think that this is an interesting concept and something that's worth exploring. The Moana as the alternative 1-drop to something like a Diablo or Magic Broom. I think a Chernobog Followers is still the best 1-drop in Amethyst. Again, depending on how you build the deck. Like, I think Diablo is better if you have more strength boosting cards, which you can argue pairs well with Goofy, because you also want strength boosting cards for the Super Goof. But I am a big fan of decks like this, because there's just a lot of unknowns that your opponent has to try to account for, and it forces them into awkward plays. Like, can't play into Super Goof, can't play into like an Elsa if you have a Maui Shark on board, right? Have to try to deal with this FLYNN, you know, or the Moana, or the Sisu, or the Mim Fox, can't let this trigger. And against what's really powerful in the format right now, or what's being played in Emerald Amethyst, they could have some trouble, right? They can't really deal with FLYNN, well, I guess until turn 3 with Kit, or turn 5 with Elsa. But yeah, it forces them to deal with it, basically. So you're forcing their hand, and when you're on the draw, forcing your opponent into plays is one of the most powerful things you can do, because it offsets their game plan, throws up their tempo. But that's going to be the deck list. I may be showcasing a match or two, so let's go into that and then wrap up the video. So I have a quick match for you here against what was the most popular deck in the room at the European Championships in Ruby Sapphire. Now, we know traditionally Ruby Amethyst has a good matchup into Ruby Sapphire, but I will say that this version is a little bit weaker into it, simply because your FLYNN Rider combo that you don't necessarily solely rely on, but is a big portion of this deck obviously, is much more susceptible to something like Ice Block Sisu, and of course Brawl, and of course Big Sisu, when you compare it to something like Locations, which doesn't get instantly destroyed by the character-based removal that Ruby Sapphire plays. Nonetheless, though, you still have some of the traditional tools that Ruby Amethyst uses in order to kind of keep control of the game, and this is a scenario where you may not value going for the FLYNN combos as much. If it's your only 2-drop, you still play it, force your opponent to have the removal, and so here, you know, the opponent does indeed have the 3-drop, but they can use the Vitalosphere on to out the Chernobog Follower, so they do punish me for not banishing it and getting the card draw, but that's honestly fine, right? Because that tells me that they don't have a big Sisu that they want to shift, or even if they did, I'd probably brawl it anyways. So here I don't quest because I don't want to risk getting Maui, but if the Maui does come down, I will be in trouble. Not trouble, but I will not proc the FLYNN. If they don't have the Maui, and given that they have very minimal cards in hand, we're good. And we know from recent lists that people have really been cutting Maui from the Ruby Sapphire. There's only like 2 copies in most decks now, and so you really don't have to fear that big strength character early. They basically need, like Ruby Sapphire plays, basically need the removal for the FLYNN, otherwise it can potentially run away with the game. Here we hard cast the Friends. We can afford to play a little bit of a slower game, and if they do have the Maui now, it's fine. I should quest with the FLYNN here as well because it's inconsequential. If they have the Maui, they can take out the Sisu, and I won't proc the FLYNN anyway, so might as well just quest with the FLYNN. If they have something like a Grammatala or something they can drop here, that will equalize the lore gain. And this is what happens with the red-blue, right? Sometimes you just have the wrong cards at the wrong time. And I mean, normally How Far All Goes and stuff would be great, but in this scenario, when I have a FLYNN on board and you don't have the removal for it, no Ice Block, no well, you've used it one Sisu already, but no brawls or anything like that. Look at the score already, and we're only on turn 5, and we were on the draw, right? So you can see that it still can be pretty powerful. I have the Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom, and I have the Pirate's Life, so all I really need to do is ink and play the Gathering Knowledge and then play the Pirate's Life, and I win the game. But yeah, we play Goat, and we have the Snake in hand to bounce it back and play the Gathering Knowledge for game. So a very easy and quick game here. The opponent, got a lot of ink, but couldn't really do anything with it, and there you can kind of see the end. I was teching in 1 Ruby Chromacon in this build, but that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. If you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.